Do you, Dan, struggle with initiating deep conversations with Stephanie? That's a question. Do you struggle with initiating deep conversations with your girls?
Yes.
And
Well, you asked a yes or no question.
okay, I know. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
You still asked a yes or no question.
Oh my gosh.
um, yes. And depending on the circumstance, that is easier or not as easy. Especially, with the kids, it's harder. I don't know
I don't think you
where.
now know as adults what's appropriate for you to initiate and what's not.
I don't. Yeah, that's a much harder. We're probably still in the shallow end of ankle deep water of that to figure out what it's like to, they'll talk to you about a lot of things. When they want to know how to use a wrench, they'll call me. So it's still very ankle deep.
Well, I think you said, I don't know if it was a podcast or one of the classes that we did, that you're still working on being approachable. So there's still times like they'll come to me and say, "Hey, mom, tell dad
Yeah.
this or that," or ask dad this and get back to me. They're still working on that.
And that's, that's probably as much as me as it is. That's as much as me now as the seeds I've sown from the years on end. Um, I can't say I ever really invited that, but I can't say I would have shunned it had it happened. But there was never a sign on the door that said, "Come talk to me about deep things." Um, with you, is getting easier. Um, it's still easier if it is a non-intra interpersonal thing. If we're talking about deep things related to what we learned on some podcast, or
Knowledge, spiritual.
that's still easier than
You don't
the
usually
the
you don't
bizarre,
initiate like a "how are you feeling? Tell me
because I
about
don't
how you're processing this."
I don't even know what that means to ask that question, because it doesn't mean much to me. You walk down the hallway, "How are you?" Like I was 3 steps ago, right? I mean, it's not a. That's a very difficult question to answer with honesty. So it's a very difficult question to therefore ask, and which also makes it a difficult question to go deep with. Well, how far does that question really go? So it's a hard question to just really engage in. Um, if you start the conversation that says, or there is some instigator that some activity caused some seismic change or something, something that was noticeable, like, you heard from the kids about X or your mom or whatever, um, then that's easier to just engage than some kind of, "Well, how are you feeling deep after your Bible reading this morning?" I would.
That's not gonna happen.
That's I,
If you
I,
ask me that, it'd be like,
what a strange question. So
"Who's
no,
putting that coffee?"
so it's a nuanced question, but generally it has to be about some objective thing. And a subjective, "how are you doing" question is still really hard.
There's a follow-up question to that. Are you ever afraid of not saying the right thing? So does that make you maybe avoid conversations or avoid topics?
Every
Because
day, every moment.
so why? Like, what was there a fear of making a mistake, like making it worse? Like, what's the fear?
Yes.
You're such a pain.
I try.
You would be a
Uh,
pain in the Asperger's.
um,
Oh,
the idea that it's, whatever I say is taken some way I didn't intend, um, which has been common. Um, so why invite the opportunity to create a mess? So it's just safer.
You run an ROI and determine sometimes that it's not worth the risk.
Most of the time, it's not worth the risk.
So we're still working on that. Still working on that. Let me turn the paper. What is the advantages of a diagnosis or identification? Well, I mean, since I have clinical training as a therapist, I was formerly a licensed professional counselor when we lived in North Carolina. I always think there's advantage to having identification. Like from a therapeutic or clinical background, you don't know how to treat or how to form an action plan if you don't know what you're dealing with. So some people are like, oh, we're not into labels. Why do we have labels? I mean, sometimes the label or the diagnosis is going to help you know how to go forward. So even when our daughter was diagnosed, that was never a shame-filled thing for us. We've always been open. And again, that might be me as well, because I don't think anybody should have shame if they do have a mental health issue, if they do have neurodiversity. I've always been trying to break the stigma, especially in the church world, that these are not things people should be stigmatized for. And we shouldn't over spiritualize them. We should offer support and care and medical science and get people where they need to go. So I think the advantages of is kind of knowing what it is and what it isn't. Looking into then tools and techniques that are specific and helpful to you, because we know, according to our research, that traditional marriage help and therapy and traditional pastoral care is not going to work. So so not only do you kind of need to know who you are, then you need to know how to get the help that you need that is the right help for you, because the wrong help isn't just bad help, it can actually be harmful. So that there's a question followed up: how do you convince a stubborn spouse that's in denial? And the answer is you can't. If someone's in denial, they're in denial, and you can't force them out of denial.
So I'll add a little bit more. I was a very purpose-driven labeler. And if you didn't give me a reason why it was valuable, it wasn't worth it. I'm still like that, but I'm a little softer. So, think about when Sydney was, you had to convince me that her having this Asperger's label netted us something. And it did in the case of school support. That label said, I get an IEP, which meant there was some value to it. And when you move into adulthood, you've got to make that same assessment. And the value of the label might or might not be there, but accepting that it could be true is a different story all by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have or not have some official label on it, but accepting who you are and what this label could be, if you take whatever test it is on the online or wherever else, right? I mean, if you go to one of those fun things, whatever that Graham thing is,
You mean Clifton Strength Finder?
that or that Graham, egram, and you get that number.
The Enneagram, which is pseudoscience.
Right. And you get that number and everybody says, ooh, I'm a 27, right? And whatever it is, oh, all right. Well, you'll even pick your zodiac sign, right? And people say, woohoo, I'm a big fat bull or whatever it is. And we'll be all excited about that because it means something. It's got some kind of whatever it is to it. But then all of a sudden you take this other thing that says you're like 7/5 of an Asperger, and all of a sudden, oh no, my world has crashed. But you fit the mold, and that turns into, well, I can't be that. But the reality is you can accept yourself in these other fun things.
Yeah.
But then accepting yourself in this aspect of, there's some things that may not be pleasant to accept, but are explaining something and could be directional in how you can move forward. That's pushing the reality of reasonable, right? Here is a clear indicator that says these things are giving me some pointers on what I could grow into, what I'm not good at, and therefore can grow, and maybe what I need to lean on someone else for. But that level of denial, with or without a label, all by itself says, something else is going on. That level of, I'm going to shun that. You ought to think about why that's true in your world, if that's really what you're doing.
Yeah. Because if someone's not willing to look or see, that's a different issue. Certainly trying to force someone into it or an ultimatum isn't going to be helpful. And we do have a show coming up. I interviewed two clinicians from the UK about diagnosis. How do I tell my spouse? How do I bring it up? And so that is a show that will dive into that a little bit more. This one's a really hard one. How do I convince my spouse I am an ally and not an enemy? Well, we did a whole course on that. So the short answer is we've talked a lot about enemy mode, escaping enemy mode. So maybe dial back to that one. That might even be a year old now with Dr. Wilder, called Escaping Enemy Mode. We talked all about that because how the brain is wired, the autistic brain is wired. It is in default mode into simple enemy mode. It just kind of wakes up in that stage. And so there has to be steps to come out of simple enemy mode and turning on your relational circuits because an A's or Conegdo, which is what women are, we are supposed to be the ally, a formidable ally, and we are not the enemy. So a free course you can download or watch, stream on our course, www.christianneuroDiversemarriage.com. Go to group coaching, and there's escaping enemy mode right there. There's some videos that we've done on that goes with the book, escaping enemy mode. So that's a long thing to unpack. Right. But there is a reason that your spouse thinks you're the enemy. His brain thinks you're the enemy.
And the question itself was a little it puts the burden on the wrong place. How do I convince my spouse that I'm not the enemy? And right. It's not your role to convince your spouse of anything, because that's never going to happen. You can't make somebody do something. You can set conditions. Here is some good environment for you to believe that to be true, but it's still that person's job, that person's role, that person's decision, person's want to accept that to be true. And so I guess I don't want someone to feel like they're a failure if it doesn't happen.
Right. Because the burden to get someone to get a diagnosis, to believe something, to change a behavior, none of that. And that's not even how boundaries work. If I set a boundary with Dan, my boundary isn't going to make him do something. My boundary is what I am no longer going to tolerate or do. So even boundaries aren't meant to
They're not
change
a compelling
someone.
thing. They
are a protective thing. They're not a coercive thing. So I guess the last question that we have, what do realistic, successful neurodiverse marriages look like? What does maintenance look like? We might have answered the maintenance question a little bit earlier. And I think, instead of, again, chasing down new tools, it's finding a consistent set of tools,
and staying in them,
be consistent with them. There's not ever a time that you're like, oh, we're good, we're past this, we never need to use our tool again, because there's never a day our brains are changing the way they're wired.
One of the things that has been extremely valuable for me is and I don't remember when we started this, but we started it might have been when the EHR stuff showed up, and we got the day-by-day devotions. Mm-hmm. Those two books have been a go-to for me. And that's another one of those that starting the day with that and putting some very intentional time at the early part of the day to set mindset right sets the rest of the day relationally in a much better place than it does otherwise.
Well, in Wilder's terms, you are turning your relational circuits on with God first, and then being intentional about what you want your relationship to be.
So when I lean on, in some of the groups now, is all of the extra material comes with, are you staying in your day-by-day book? I mean, and that's part of it. So the Thursday night group is the Wilder material and the day-by-day. And we start the group with, which one of these in the last couple of weeks really piqued your interest? Which one of those gave you that moment? And then, because that's the kind of thing you come back to, that's the kind of thing you remember, and that's the kind of thing that causes you to come back. It's the one that wants you to, I've found some really good nuggets in that. I found some things that are valuable I'll come back and see what else there is. And it is that taste and see approach that keeps you wanting more.
Yeah. And so there's the maintenance, the consistency, using what works. And again, like sometimes some wives will be like, well, we shouldn't have to do this. We shouldn't have to use these tools. We shouldn't have to use these scripts. Well, if you're going to stay in a neurodiverse marriage, well, there are always going to be tools and scripts and things that you're working on.
But that argument falls apart if you consider what the scripts, the spiritual counterpart of that is. That would be like saying, I only need to read my Bible once.
I got the information. I read it from cover to cover. I'm good.
I'm good. Mm-hmm. And well, I don't think any of us maybe any of us, some of us might, because I use a superlative.
I know. It's like, I'm going to correct him in a minute, but darn, you caught yourself.
And I have to back off almost. I have to back off quick.
Man, I wanted to catch you.
We wouldn't say that that's true in, typical Christendom. We wouldn't say, oh, well, you've read it once. That's good. That's good for you. That's all you got to do. It's going back and back and back and back. And the same thing's true in relationship. So yeah, maybe we're in the cover of a neurodiverse umbrella, but the reality is if you were not in a neurodiverse umbrella, you would still be doing some kind of healthy practice.
Right. Neurotypicals, to have a healthy relationship, need to be doing things intentionally. They're just doing different things intentionally and consistency. So, I mean, some of those are the same, like building trust and building joy and all of that, but the how we go about doing it. And I think like the realistic, successful neurodiverse marriage, what does it look like? Well, I think it first starts with both people accepting the neurodiversity. And that means accepting all of it, the positives, the negatives, the hard of it. I think it's not blaming autism and Asperger's for every single problem that you have. That's going to also lead to the person on the spectrum being like, well, I don't want that. That means if I have the label that everything is my fault, that's, who wants that burden placed on them? So I think at first is that acceptance. And so sometimes for the guys, there's a cognitive acceptance, like, well, the criteria fit. So, okay, I guess I'm on the spectrum, but there's not really an acceptance that Dan was talking about. Well, if this is true, then it means I've got some mind blindness issues. It means I speak literally in black and white and be cognitively inflexible, and I need to, accept feedback on that. For the neurotypical spouse, it might look like, okay, well, you are on the spectrum and I still expect you to be neurotypical. So I'm still mad at you that you're not doing neurotypical things. That's not really acceptance. That's still trying to push someone into a form that they can't do, and you're going to always be disappointed. So I think it starts with acceptance. It's the education piece. I think you have to know who you are. So if you don't like our podcast, there are other podcasts out there. There are articles to read. You can be educating yourself about these differences and how to learn from your differences and how to encourage each other. In Wilder and Corsi's words, it's hold each other's weakness kindly and softly and patiently. That I'm going to have to give Dan extra time to process for the rest of his life. And I'm starting to lose my hearing, so he's going to have to repeat things on and on and on and on and on and on again. So as we are kind of embracing those two things, if Dan needs more time to process, I've had to work on being patient and giving that time. And you got to be patient with me when I say, what did you say? Where was Johnny the doorknob and why didn't he make it? You have to just have those conversations. That's a joke about poor old Johnny the doorknob.
And a classic misunderstanding.
It's the funniest one, but he didn't make it, by the way. He did not make it, that poor doorknob. I think is also understanding that it's not an if, it's a when. WHEN. It is a win. You are going to have another misunderstanding. You're going to get lost again in the store. You're going to think you were clear on an agreement and it didn't go the way you thought. And then how you repair. Repairing quickly, not letting, days and weeks go by. I think that's part of it. Anything else?
I got in all of that. It's kind of a pilgrim's progress kind of idea. And in the marital relationship, it's a, in an homage to Bruce Fleming, it's a return to Eden.
Mm.
You think about where you are right now, at least in chapter 3, before you get into chapter 4, where man and woman were. Pinnacled, they were naked and unashamed. They were fully exposed, all of who they were.
Vulnerable.
They were, and then okay with that. You can see all of me. Whatever, there's nothing to hide. And it is a falling forward towards that forever that I think is a high bar. But, if you look at that as this is what I am trying to do today, and I will be good at it or not. And then tomorrow I will do that again. And you're both willing to give the other person the grace that says, I know you're trying. Today wasn't that good, but maybe tomorrow will be better. But not also at the same time saying, excusing the bad. I mean, you're not trying to say that didn't count or whatever that was. You're holding the accountability, as Wilder would say, reminding you of your true self, but still saying, come up, let's both go. In the Pilgrim's Progress kind of idea, let's both walk the path. And when that is true, when you're both on the same direction and you're heading towards that idyllic Eden idea, I think whether you're really good at it or not that good at it, it is that intention, it is that purpose, it is that walk that says, yes, I am good. I will become good at this. Whether today is true or not, tomorrow gets you there better. The following day, you're there better. You're falling forward.
Yeah. And I think, we've learned, like with poor Johnny the doorknob, to laugh about some of those things, not at each other, but, because I think it will be like, that will be kind of our code to each other. Like, okay, all I heard was Johnny was a doorknob. What else? What did you just say? So code words and learning to laugh after some of these things, like after you've repaired, of course. So I do think we laugh together a lot. We can make each other laugh. And I think that's like a goal. I'm constantly trying to do silly things to get him to laugh, because it's hard to crack this face right here. To get a good laugh is very difficult, but I'm committed.
And one of my goals since we've been married, or at least before then, was to get you to spew something out of your mouth.
Yes. Well, actually, you want me to spew it out my nose.
Out your nose,
yes. And I have not. I don't.
I've come really, really
You've come close. You've come close, but no, I'm not going to give that to you. I'm not giving that to you. As we are closing, there was one more question about narcissistic behavior being a coping mechanism for a neurodivergent person, or some kind of protective measure. I want to direct you. I did a podcast with Jody Carlton where we talked about narcissism and autism. I was just interviewed today, and I'll let you guys know when it's on. It'll probably be on my Facebook page, NeuroDiverse Christian Couples. I was interviewed by Marriage Recovery Center, Dr. David Hawkins, and he is a narcissist specialist. And he said in his practice, so like, whereas my practice is mostly people on the spectrum and his is mostly people with narcissism or other personality disorders, he's saying that he's seeing a 30 to 40% crossover of people on the spectrum or ADHD that also have a personality pathology or traits. And so Jody Carlton in our interview talked about, so there can be a crossover that the person is on the spectrum and truly narcissistic personality disorder. What Jody was talking about is sometimes a person on the spectrum could be mimicking or camouflaging maybe either a boss or a parent, because if that narcissistic person was stronger or angrier and kind of got what they want, and that's kind of a persona that someone's taken on, that's actually more treatable, actually. So far, of every case I've worked on where there's truly been a narcissistic personality and autism combined, there has not been a success story there yet. Those usually end in divorce, because that's just a combination that's really difficult. Now, if that person has taken on narcissistic traits, maybe because a parent was a narcissist or is camouflaging or mimicking, someone and then can learn that these narcissistic traits, these protective measures are no longer needed and work through that, there's a more favorable treatment outcome than if the person is both. So I would encourage you, you can find it on a podcast that I taught with Jody Carlton, or you can go to my YouTube, which is Dr. Stephanie C. Holmes, and look up Jody Carlton. And I limited down the whole podcast just to the specific, our discussion on narcissism. So it is our time where we start to close the show. Be thinking of the tagline at the end. Be thinking.
It's got a rabbit in it.
A rabbit in it. Where'd you get that from?
The rabbit is on a journey.
Oh my gosh. Okay, stop. So before we end, by the time this airs, our summer classes are full. Dan and I's summer classes are full. However, if you're still looking for a group by one of the coaches that's in our referral system, go to ChristianNeuroDiverseMarriage.com, go to group coaching, check out some of the other groups that are still there. There may still be openings, but for our classes, they are starting the very next week and we are full. The fall classes are already up. So if you're interested in a fall class because you didn't make a summer class, Dan will have one for men, and then we'll have one. It's couples, but the men and women do it separately because that is the preferred way. At least how the wives have asked to do it is separate. And then I'll have about 3 or 4 groups. There has been more and more demand for groups for the wives, and so I keep adding one. I think I'm up to 5 in the fall. So thank you for joining us for our question and answer session today. So there is hope for your future, and
there's a rabbit on your journey.
You suck. You did that on purpose. You did that on purpose. Okay, try again. There is hope for your future, and
you're not alone on your journey.
And it has nothing to do with duck season or rabbit season.
Huss and pepper.
No, that's another one. Okay, can't even go there. All right, until next time, y'all.
Bye, everybody.